In the sprawling informal settlements of South Africa, basic human sanitation was quietly transformed into a multi-billion rand extraction scheme. Millions of impoverished families were left to endure devastating squalor, whilst municipal resources meant for basic survival vanished into private coffers. But the pivot came when forensic trails and the shocking disclosures of a former personal driver revealed that these lucrative public contracts were tied directly to the political orbit of Julius Malema. This was never merely about logistics or local governance. This was about how political proximity secures immense wealth, whilst whistleblowers pay the ultimate price. If wealth grows but inequality deepens, who is development really for? Stay with South African dynamics. This is far more than a headline. It is an uncompromising examination of institutional power and human dignity. If you stand for truth and public accountability, show your support right now by liking this broadcast, leaving your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to join our global community. To truly understand this unfolding crisis, we must step past the political theatre and examine the documented paper trail inside the municipal engine itself. In the sprawling urban expanse of the Ekurhuleni metropolitan municipality just east of Johannesburg, governance is not merely an administrative exercise, it is a profound test of human survival. Within hundreds of densely populated informal settlements, where formal sewage infrastructure remains non-existent, access to a serviced chemical toilet is the absolute baseline of human dignity. For over a decade, municipal leadership justified colossal budgetary allocations under the banner of public health and restorative equity. Yet behind the official rhetoric lay a procurement machine that turned basic human necessity into a lucrative frontier for political patronage. When the municipality structured its massive 3-year chemical sanitation program, allocating a staggering sum exceeding 2.2 billion rand across 15 selected private entities, it claimed the process was competitive, rigorous, and completely transparent. The investigative reality told a profoundly different story. At the center of this massive disbursement stood a commercial entity named TTB Supplying and Construction. On paper, the enterprise appeared to be an ordinary municipal contractor entrusted with maintaining mobile sanitation units across neglected townships. In reality, official company records identified the sole director as Thabang Collins Foromo. For those familiar with the historical ascent of the economic freedom fighters, that name resonated with unmistakable political significance. Foromo was not a career industrialist or an experienced sanitation engineer. He was widely documented as the former personal driver for Julius Malema during the mid-2000s in Polokwane, when Malema was consolidating his political authority within the African National Congress Youth League. The logistical architecture of this tender defied every standard of public administration. TTB maintained its principal registered address in Tzaneen, nestled in the northern province of Limpopo, more than 400 kilometers away from the informal settlements of Ekurhuleni. Municipal tender regulations strictly mandated that any contracting entity must possess verifiable local operational facilities, specialized equipment, and immediate response capacity within the municipal borders. When investigative journalists demanded proof of a functional depot within the region, the company responded not with operational documentation, but with legal threats and allegations of defamation. When confronted with the documented history, Foromo issued a remarkably evasive defense, insisting that while Julius Malema was his political leader, they were never personal friends, adding that if he had driven him across the country, it was simply because he happened to own a motor vehicle. In political analysis, such explanations crumble under the weight of institutional scrutiny. Personal loyalty, historical proximity, and political access have long served as the invisible currency of municipal procurement in post-apartheid governance. This extraction was not confined to a single individual. Broader investigative audits revealed that the web of patronage extended to long-standing business associates from Limpopo, most notably Selby Manthata, through Selby Construction and RSMM Construction. Manthata was previously charged alongside Julius Malema in the infamous 2012 on-point engineering fraud and corruption indictment, a case involving provincial infrastructure tenders and trust fund payments that was ultimately struck from the court roll. In Ekurhuleni, Manthata's entities quietly accumulated more than 1.6 billion rand from the municipal treasury over a 10-year span. This multi-billion rand pipeline began in 2016, the exact year the municipality fractured into a fragile coalition government in which the economic freedom fighters emerged as the decisive power broker. Here, the fundamental clash between integrity and corruption became absolute. Public procurement was no longer determined by merit or logistical competence, but by quiet arrangements negotiated beneath the table of political convenience. Billions flowed seamlessly into familiar hands, while millions of vulnerable residents remained trapped in squalor. Yet when one dedicated public servant entered the municipal archives to follow this financial trail, his pen exposed a reality so dangerous that it would cost him his life. When Mpho Mafole walked through the doors of the Ekurhuleni Municipal Audit Department in early 2025, he did so with the quiet diligence of a career forensic investigator. He was not a political operative. He carried no partisan allegiance. His sole constitutional mandate was to examine the balance sheets, verify municipal compliance, and ensure that every single rand disbursed for public sanitation directly served the impoverished residents of the informal settlements. Yet, within a mere 3 months of assuming his duties, Mafole uncovered a procurement architecture so profoundly compromised that it threatened the very foundation of municipal governance. His internal audit report was scathing and uncompromising. Mafole systematically dismantled the legitimacy of the 2.2 billion rand chemical sanitation awards, demonstrating that established procurement regulations had been completely bypassed. Qualified service providers with verified local infrastructure had been arbitrarily disqualified, whilst politically connected enterprises with registered offices hundreds of kilometers away were handed lucrative 3-year contracts. He documented inflated invoices, unverified servicing schedules, and shell enterprises incapable of fulfilling basic sanitary operations. In forensic auditing, numbers do not lie. They reveal deliberate intent. Mafole refused to look away, preparing a formal dossier that demanded immediate contractual cancellations and sweeping administrative sanctions. The response to his forensic findings was not an administrative review or legal arbitration. It was lethal violence. On the 30th of June, 2025, Mpho Mafole was intercepted by armed assassins and gunned down in cold blood. He became the second municipal auditor within 18 months to be murdered in Ekurhuleni following the targeted assassination of Mpho Mafole on the 8th of December 2023. This was not an isolated act of street violence. It was an execution designed to enforce institutional silence and protect multi-million rand financial pipelines. In South Africa's embattled democracy, the murder of Mpho Mafole reopened a devastating national trauma. It echoed the horrific assassination of Babita Deokaran in August 2021, who was gunned down outside her Johannesburg home after blowing the whistle on rampant procurement fraud at Tembisa Hospital. A terrifying pattern had entrenched itself within the state machinery. Those who loot public funds operate with apparent impunity, whilst those who defend constitutional integrity are hunted down and buried. When a democratic society fails to protect the men and women who uphold the law, public governance degenerates into syndicate rule. The investigative journalism series titled Hunted, led by reporters Sikonathi Mantshantsha, Jeff Wicks, and Azara Karim, refused to let Mafole's murder disappear into bureaucratic obscurity. Their relentless examination of the tender documents directly connected the beneficiaries of the chemical toilet contracts to the highest echelons of municipal influence. What began as a routine municipal audit transformed inevitably into a critical Julius Malema investigation, examining how individuals within the leadership orbit of the economic freedom fighters secured financial dominance across municipal coalitions. Here, the moral gravity of the crisis demands absolute clarity. Not silence, not noise, truth. The blood of public servants cannot be dismissed as collateral damage in the pursuit of political power. The tragedy lies not merely in the loss of dedicated lives, but in the institutional betrayal of the millions of vulnerable citizens who rely on these very auditors to protect their basic human survival. Yet, as the nation mourned its fallen whistleblowers, the political machine moved swiftly to redirect public attention, presenting a fierce spectacle of revolutionary rhetoric while shielding the structural rot beneath. The human cost of institutional betrayal is never recorded in municipal boardrooms. It is etched directly into the daily struggle of the informal settlements. Across communities such as Tembisa Davidson and Kwathema, hundreds of thousands of families awaken every morning to an unyielding reality where basic sanitation is not a guaranteed municipal service, but a daily negotiation with neglect. Chemical toilets stand overflowing and unserviced for weeks on end, forcing mothers' young children and elderly residents to endure conditions that strip away the foundational essence of human dignity. This is the quiet structural violence of public sector mismanagement, when billions of rand allocated for essential public health are siphoned into private commercial networks. The consequence is not merely administrative failure, it is the physical abandonment of the most vulnerable citizens in post-apartheid society. It is precisely here that the profound ideological contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. For more than a decade, Julius Malema and the economic freedom fighters cultivated an international and domestic reputation as the militant champions of the dispossessed. Dressed in the iconic red overalls of the industrial working class, delivering thunderous speeches against economic inequality and elite exploitation, the party positioned itself as the only uncompromising alternative to the established order. They proclaimed an agenda of radical economic transformation, state-led redistribution, and absolute solidarity with the impoverished masses. Yet forensic scrutiny reveals a devastating disconnect between revolutionary theatre and material reality. When official municipal records demonstrate that individuals within Malema's historical orbit, from former personal drivers to long-standing business associates, have quietly extracted hundreds of millions of rand from the very municipal programs designed to service squatter camps, the moral legitimacy of that political posture collapses. The reverberations of the Malema Tender Scandal extend far beyond forensic balance sheets. They strike at the core of public trust, exposing how populist rhetoric can function as an elaborate shield for conventional political patronage. How can a movement credibly demand the dismantling of systemic injustice when its own network benefits directly from the deprivation of the working poor? This systemic patronage carries severe civic consequences. When ordinary citizens witness that political proximity yields immense wealth, whilst education competence and honest labour lead only to perpetual unemployment, the democratic contract begins to disintegrate. A profound cynicism takes root, eroding public faith in the possibility of ethical governance and convincing millions that the political system is permanently rigged in favour of an untouchable elite. Take a moment right now to share with us in the comments where you are watching from, whether from across the United States, the African continent, or anywhere across the diaspora. South African Dynamics would like to express our deepest gratitude to each and every one of you, and we send our most heartfelt wishes. May your journey always be guided by dignity, truth, and unwavering justice. Your voices in the comments below unite us across global borders in our shared commitment to truth. The socio-economic damage inflicted by these compromised contracts is enduring. It deepens poverty, paralyzes local service delivery, and leaves impoverished communities trapped in structural despair. When those who promise radical emancipation participate in the quiet machinery of extraction, the hopes of millions of citizens are reduced to transactional currency. Yet this intricate web of patronage did not operate in isolation. It was actively sustained by the volatile dynamics of municipal coalition politics, where backroom negotiations transformed decisive council votes into absolute leverage over public coffers. Beyond the municipal borders of Ekurhuleni, the institutional decay exposed by this chemical sanitation scandal reflects a far wider structural crisis across South Africa's democratic architecture. Since the watershed municipal elections of 2016, the country's major metropolitan centres have operated under precarious coalition governance. In council chambers where neither traditional majority party commands outright dominance, smaller political formations have wielded disproportionate leverage. Holding approximately 11% of the municipal council vote, the economic freedom fighters positioned themselves as decisive kingmakers. In exchange for crucial voting blocks and mayoral appointments, direct influence over administrative committees, and massive municipal procurement pipelines became the unspoken currency of urban governance. This entire mechanism operates within the shadow of backroom compromise, where systemic patronage inevitably supplants institutional oversight. While party leadership proclaims radical transformation from national stages, municipal coalitions have frequently functioned as extraction networks. This deepening reality has drawn intense scrutiny from international policy institutes, diplomatic missions, and global financial bodies across the United States and Europe. For observers in Washington and London, South Africa's long-term stability is intrinsically tethered to the integrity of its public institutions and the rule of law. When procurement within the continent's most sophisticated economy is compromised by familial and personal patronage, international investor confidence fractures, sovereign risk escalates, and vital development partnerships are jeopardized. Simultaneously, civil society bodies and constitutional advocacy groups, including AfriForum, have escalated legal challenges within the High Court in Pretoria, challenging repeated violations of judicial orders regarding property rights and unlawful land occupations. The convergence of inflammatory populism and documented municipal financial irregularities has fundamentally transformed the international assessment of the Red Beret leadership. Across foreign policy journals and analytical forums within the African diaspora, the reality of EFF Corruption Exposed has dismantled the narrative of moral exceptionalism, proving that militant rhetoric cannot permanently obscure the absence of administrative probity. This global and domestic intersection brings the Republic to a critical confrontation between accountability versus impunity. Continental institutions, including the African Union, have consistently identified public sector corruption as the primary obstacle to true developmental sovereignty. When resources allocated for the poorest citizens are diverted into private hands, the foundational legitimacy of the democratic experiment is called into question. The international community is observing whether South Africa's resilient judiciary and courageous investigative reporters can hold political power accountable. Yet, as the fractures within these municipal coalitions widen under the glare of public exposure, the decisive struggle moves toward the horizon, where an embattled nation must determine whether its constitutional foundations can survive the weight of systemic compromise. The crisis uncovered within the municipal procurement corridors of Ekurhuleni is not an isolated failing of local administration. It is a defining test of South Africa's constitutional resolve. As the Republic navigates an era of fragmented coalitions and deepening economic strain, the central question facing both citizens and international observers is whether the state can muster the institutional courage to dismantle entrenched networks of patronage. A genuine democratic future cannot be constructed upon the mere substitution of one political elite for another, whilst the underlying mechanisms of extraction remain untouched. If power changes hands but not structure, has anything really changed? The path toward institutional renewal demands systemic structural transformation. First and foremost, the Republic must establish comprehensive, inviolable protections for forensic auditors and public whistleblowers. The tragic deaths of dedicated officials demonstrate that without state-guaranteed physical security, legal immunity, and specialized investigative task teams, the pursuit of truth becomes an intolerable personal risk. Furthermore, municipal procurement must be stripped of political interference through the mandatory implementation of open, fully automated tender oversight. Every contract, every beneficial owner, and every disbursement must be accessible to public scrutiny in real time. For the millions of South Africans who endure the daily reality of underdeveloped townships, the stakes could not be higher. True national liberation is not measured by the volume of radical speeches delivered from stadium podiums, nor is it reflected in the luxury acquired by political intermediaries. It is measured by the tangible restoration of human dignity, clean water, functional sanitation, safe communities, and accountable governance. The historical promise of the struggle was never to replace one form of exclusion with another, but to guarantee that public wealth serves the public good. To achieve this, the democratic standard must remain uncompromising. Not reform, not rhetoric, accountability. Before we conclude today's investigation, let us pause and reflect upon the broader horizon. What you have witnessed throughout this broadcast is not merely an analysis of tenders and political maneuvers. It is an enduring fight for human dignity and constitutional truth. If you believe that public power must always remain accountable to the people, subscribe to South African Dynamics right now. By subscribing, you are not simply supporting an independent channel. You are choosing to walk alongside us as we document the defining struggles of Africa's evolving story. Stand with us and remain vigilant for the vital revelations that lie ahead. History will ultimately judge this era not by the theatrical clashes between political leaders, but by the decisive verdict rendered upon the balance sheets of public trust. In the final assessment, the tragedy of Ekurhuleni transcends the administrative boundaries of local municipal governance and strikes at the very soul of South Africa's democratic experiment. What began as a forensic audit into basic township sanitation has transformed into an unavoidable national reckoning with political integrity. The documented revelations surrounding the Malema Tender Scandal remind us that no political movement can credibly proclaim the liberation of the working poor while its extended network benefits directly from the deprivation of the vulnerable. When basic human dignity is commodified and dedicated public servants like Mpho Mafole pay with their lives for defending the public purse, the moral legitimacy of leadership is irrevocably dismantled. The broader international documentation of EFF corruption exposed across municipal coalitions demonstrates that fiery populist rhetoric cannot permanently obscure the structural realities of public procurement. The unresolved questions at the heart of the Malema Tender Scandal will continue to reverberate across courtrooms, parliamentary chambers, and township streets. South Africa's enduring strength has never resided in the self-interest of its political elites, but in the unyielding resilience of its citizens, the constitutional independence of its judiciary, and the fearless pursuit of truth by its investigative press. The archive of history will forever preserve the memory of those who defended public integrity against overwhelming odds. As the Republic stands at this historic crossroads, the ultimate verdict will not be delivered on stadium stages, but in the collective conscience of a nation demanding systemic justice. Will South Africa permit political patronage to define its democratic destiny, or will the constitutional principles of dignity, truth, and public accountability finally prevail?